If you're a horror movie fan, there's no way you haven't seen or heard of The Fog by John Carpenter, which was released in 1980. This isn't just a ghost story. It's more like a nightmare wrapped in Lovecraftian layers that are again wrapped in sea mist and vengeance. It doesn't have Cthulhu himself showing up on the big screen, no, but this coastal horror has atmosphere, dread, and a sense of ancient wrongs coming out of the abyss. Right after Halloween was released, The Fog changed gears and gave us some ancient, older, and weirder kinds of horror. So, in this video, we're going to be diving deep into the film's eerie inspiration to understand how this movie managed to give us Lovecraftian horror without even name-dropping the horror maestro himself. Before we get into this explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. It's a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Setting the stage, the town of Antonio Bay. At first glance, Antonio Bay looks like any other sleepy coastal town, but things took a turn for the worse when the fog started rolling in. The moment the fog starts, the town feels and looks cursed. It seems like a town that was never supposed to be on this earth, but somehow managed to come into existence by burying something ancient and wrong. The cliffside vistas, the weather-beaten docks, and the creaky old buildings might look like the perfect fishing village to spend the summer in, but if you look closely, you'll realize there's something just not right with this place. The wind howls differently here. The townspeople don't seem alive. They seem too resigned to their fates to be alive. Or is it the relationship the town shares with the sea, the natural provider and the source of dread for Antonio Bay? In a lot of ways, this town feels like it's detached from the rest of the world. It's almost as if it's suspended in time, as this doesn't feel accidental at all. This quiet, too quiet town is the breeding ground for dread. The eerie atmosphere builds not only through visuals, but also through sound. I mean, I doubt anyone could forget the radio waves crackling over the dark ocean when no one is listening. That was one of the most chilling motifs of the entire movie. Adrienne Barbeau gave us a stellar performance as Stevie Wayne, the late-night radio jockey who did her sultry broadcasts from the Lighthouse studio, which had a hypnotic calmness to it, which felt way more eerie than serene. Her voice is almost akin to the siren song that doomed so many sailors when they were lost in the ocean. And then we have the fog itself. It's a character in its own right, the way it shows up and takes over the entire town. It's almost like it's a sentient beast in and of itself, not just blanketing the town, oh no. It feels like the fog is invading the town and marking it as its own. Every frame of the movie is haunted by the presence of the fog, and this approach is felt in our bones in the opening scene. The opening scene for this movie is one of the most underrated horror intros ever, believe us. We have an old man telling a ghost story to a group of kids around a campfire. He talks about a shipwreck that cost several lives because the crew was lured in by a false beacon to their death. This story has weight in both the narrative and the performance. Carpenter gave this story some space, allowing viewers to sit and enjoy the warm glow of the campfire as the old man tells us the story. The camera lingers on the shadow, the fire, and the children who mirror the same wonder and fear that we feel. This story sets the tone perfectly for a world where the past never dies, potent foreshadowing for what this movie has in store for us. The town's centennial celebration is the narrative's ticking clock and the catalyst for everything that follows as a whole. On the surface, it seems purely coincidental, no? But hear this, dear viewers, it was no coincidence. The horrors awakened in Antonio Bay on the eve of this self-congratulatory event. The sins of the past showed up right on time to collect their debt with interest, and this made sense. The celebration was a lot more than a harmless civic affair. It was a provocation. The history of Antonio Bay isn't as clean as you might have thought. So, with the ringing of the bells and the raising of the flags, the civilians of Antonio Bay are opening the door to horrors they didn't commit but have to pay the price for. So far, the story sounds like standard ghost story fare, right? But here is where the fog diverges from those classic horror tropes. Although we do get some jump scares and some gore, that's not what the fog is about. It's actually about the sense of foreboding that never lets go. Carpenter prioritized the mood over the monsters, and we, as an audience, feel it. Even before the vengeful spirits show up, we feel their presence. We sense it. They infect the air, the technology, even the sea. It's evident that the entire town is being pulled into a liminal space beyond the grasp of time and magic, and we're simply along for the ride. Just like Lovecraft's Innsmouth or Arkham, Antonio Bay is also a place where the past has teeth and reality is thinner. The ghost story of this coastal town is no longer trapped in the past. It's walking up now, and we're stuck, watching helplessly as the fog rolls in, claiming everything that was stolen. So, what truly happened in Antonio Bay 100 years ago? Let's find out. The Cursed Legacy, a crime covered by time. Everything about the fog is centered around Antonio Bay. More precisely, it's centered around a secret that remained buried under 100 years of civic pride and traditions in this California coastal town. You see, the town's founders deliberately caused the death of those men a century ago, and they did it all in the name of prosperity. The town's founders lured the ship, the Elizabeth Dane, to crash upon the rocky cliffs by firing up a false beacon. The crew of this ship was led by a leper named Blake. Blake and his crew were on their way to find land for themselves near Antonio Bay. They wanted to build their own community where they could live out the rest of their days in pride and have some dignity and peace. Instead, they were betrayed and murdered, and their gold was stolen by the founders to build Antonio Bay. This betrayal is a lot more than just exposition. It's also the spiritual core of the film. It's a festering wound that time has tried to hide with plaques, parades, and festivals, but the wound never stops bleeding. This story is about reckoning. The fog uses all of its elements to frame the story as an ethical indictment. Blake and his men, who were killed off, deserve their revenge, and the very fabric of reality is willing to tip over to let that happen, because, on a cosmic level, the universe is trying to balance the scales. This cosmic sense of justice simply adds to the fog and elevates it beyond a typical ghost story. It is compared to Lovecraftian horror because Lovecraft's work was full of themes like this. Buried ancestral sins are rearing their heads one more time to ruin the very present that everyone is clinging to. For example, in The Shadow over Innsmouth, we learn that the town is prosperous because it struck a deal with the deep-sea monsters. In the story titled The Rats in the Walls, the protagonist learns about the ancestors' horrifying legacy of cannibalism. In each case, everyone tried their damnedest to make sure the truth remained hidden and justice was never served. However, the history simply refused to stay buried. The crimes of the past weren't forgotten. They waited in the dark, festering like an unhealing wound until they ruptured into the present and took everyone with them. In The Fog, the rupture I speak of is very literal. This mysterious force pulls up a hidden diary from the church wall and places it for anyone to find. Father Malone discovered the weather journal of his grandfather, one of the original conspirators, and the journal shows the past. The journal condemns the past. The grandfather didn't die a hero, he lived a lie, hailed for a town he built by spilling the blood of innocent men. The tone of his journal is guilt-ridden and chilling. It's a confession that takes the veil of propriety off everyone. This journal acts like Lovecraft's infamous Necronomicon. It's not just a source of knowledge, but also the doorway to the truth that humanity didn't want to confront. Rather, it wasn't meant to confront. This means the fog isn't random. This haunting, it's not random either. All the horrors that we see happening in front of our eyes are controlled by someone. They were controlled by human hands who used their powers selfishly. The celebration of 100 years of successfully keeping the truth hidden and living in prosperity and happiness when the town was founded on injustice stirred something deep within it. The fog is not just the dead reclaiming their pounds of flesh, it's about the timeline correcting itself. Blake and his crew were cheated out of a place in this world. The stolen gold that paid for Antonio Bay's prosperity was now returning to its rightful owners, even if it was paid in blood. So, this ghostly revenge is also a karmic realignment. There is a sense of inevitability and helplessness that permeates every scene of The Fog. This is key to both Lovecraft and Carpenter. The townspeople didn't murder Blake and his crew. Most of them didn't even know about this happening in the first place. Yet, they are the ones to suffer because they inherited the sin of the original 6 people. The legacy of Antonio Bay is corrupt, and even if they don't realize it, the townspeople benefit from that corruption, and that moral rot is what led to the fog coming. The town was never meant to exist in the first place. It was built on a lie, and it was time the truth set everyone free. Another Lovecraftian parallel in this story is how fate was manipulated by forces that we cannot comprehend. The shipwreck, the journal, the centennial, and the fog. Do you think all of these things happened simply by coincidence? We don't think so either. It feels as if all of these events were carefully orchestrated by something to ensure that no one ever forgets what actually happened a century ago. The inevitability of the narration echoes Lovecraft's deterministic universe, where no matter what you do, free will is an illusion, and chances are you're going to be played like a pawn anyways. This Lovecraftian aspect of the movie is also driven home by how the fog treats knowledge. If you're a Lovecraft fan, you would know that in his world, knowledge is treated as if it were a danger. The more you know, the closer you are to destruction. Father Malone comes across his grandfather's journal, which he assumed would have something in it to stop the curse. Instead, on reading, Father Malone found out that the journal states why the curse happened in the first place. The more he read, hoping for some salvation, the more he learned how he was connected to the horror. The knowledge in this movie simply damned everyone who had that. In a more traditional horror film, knowing what happened in the past allows the characters to fix or resolve the part of the story that led to the curse happening in the first place. But here, things don't happen that way. Here, if you understand the curse, you will simply be overwhelmed with dread because the realization that you cannot fix the past, you can only suffer the consequences, sinks in. The idea of prosperity being purchased with blood is another classic Lovecraftian theme. We saw it in Innsmouth just like we saw it in Antonio Bay. The stolen gold that we see in the Gog is a symbol of both guilt and greed. The gold paid for the church, the roads, even the town hall. All of the infrastructure of this town was bought with murder, and this taint will always be there. It only became public knowledge with the fog coming in, and the deaths in this film, because of the fog, carry weight. The victims aren't chosen willy-nilly. Each of them is related to the original 6 founders. There's a grim symmetry, which is reinforced in the story that the blood that was spilt can only be paid for with blood. It is not an eye for an eye kind of justice, it's something more metaphysical than that. It's the fate that's driven by obligation. Retribution is programmed into the fabric of time ever since the crime was committed. When the movie ends, you're sufficiently chilled by the ending, which is morally ambiguous at best. After finding out what happened a century ago, Father Malone offers the gold back to Blake and his people. The ghost accepts the gold and you think things go well, but nope. The ghost returns and this time takes Malone with it. This final twist of the knife sends home the message that even if there are gestures of repentance, and even if they are accepted, that doesn't mean things are forgiven and forgotten. The sin cannot be undone, and the past cannot be forgiven. This is the most Lovecraftian moment for fog. The survivors of the fog are not vindicated. They are simply spared for now. The fog goes away, but it leaves behind scars, and the town's legacy is tarnished. Carpenter doesn't offer us hope like most horror films do. Instead, he provides us with a reflection. The sin of the past, no matter how covered up it gets, eventually returns, and when it does, it erases everyone in its path. So, the cursed legacy of Antonio Bay is a layered cosmic horror. The past of the town is ever present in the present days, and the sins of the fathers are passed down to the children. The universe may have done nothing when the crime was committed, but that doesn't mean it forgot. The universe always remembers. But this coastal town and the premise are the more subtle aspects of Lovecraftian horror in this movie. The more in-your-face one is, you guessed it, the fog. The fog as a Lovecraftian force. The fog isn't just a weather event or even a backdrop. It's a very active force of nature which can be best described as mythic, supernatural, and semi-sentient. From the very first scene, you see the fog, and you know for a fact that it's not bound by the same rules that we follow. It doesn't behave the way normal fog does. It has this ghostly light within it. It moves against the wind, which shouldn't be possible. It ignores the geography and the landscape around it and simply shows up wherever it needs to go because it seems to know where it's going. Power cuts out, phones die off, and time runs slow from the moment the fog comes on screen. You could say that it's a vessel of judgment for the crew of the Elizabeth Dane, but we'll do you one better. The fog is a Lovecraftian mechanism that was absolutely necessary for the cosmic retribution that the town had coming for a long time. This fog is the harbinger of reckoning, an eldritch enforcer with how it bends the reality around it. Just like every other Lovecraftian force ever, there's barely any detail about how this fog works. There are no scientific theories explaining why it works, there are no protests against the fog or any silver bullets or crucifixes to repel the fog. This is an elemental force that responds to no logic. It only responds to moral imbalance. The fog showed up because it had intentions of appearing, and once it got what it wanted, it disappeared. The hosts themselves play second when the fog is around. The ghosts act more like the extension of the fog, and not the other way around. In Lovecraft's vast universe, things don't simply happen. When they happen, they also destroy reality as we know it. The cosmic forces in the universe operate on scales beyond our understanding, and the fog is just like that. The concept of the fog is chilling, yes, but it wouldn't have given us the amount of existential dread that it did had it not been for John Carpenter. His minimalist style heightened the unknown dread. The fog doesn't have snarling monsters or gore. Carpenter gives us glimpses of figures moving through the mist, glowing eyes, and red hooks, but never the full picture. He never overplays his hands, and that's why what lays within the fog remained obscured just enough to get our neurons firing and filling in the blanks. And this kind of lack of certainty is exactly the conditions where Lovecraftian horror thrives. The horror is never from what we see, it's always from what we almost see. By resisting the urge to overexpose, Carpenter managed to give us enough time to start painting the unseen and the fear of the unknown to fully sink in. The fog works so well because we simply don't know what it is all about or its boundaries. It stretches beyond the screen and beyond our mortal comprehension. We always looked at the fog as God stretching its fingers over Antonio Bay, finally tipping the balance that was imbalanced all those years ago. Now, let's look at the visuals of the fog because that's the most iconic part of the whole thing. The soft, luminous glow of the fog with that sickly greenish hue made it seem more alien than ever. The fog obscured things, yes, but it also changed them. The buildings that the fog just crossed over are left glowing like they no longer belonged in our world. This otherworldly aspect of the fog is what makes it feel like fragments of a separate reality were brought into our world by this fog that clearly doesn't belong here. This aesthetic distinction matters, even if you don't think it does. See, when we talk about Lovecraftian monsters, we think of Cthulhu or Nyarlathotep, right? These monsters were never just monsters, they were the embodiment of everything wrong and then some. Cthulhu didn't just look weird, his presence literally bent space and time. Similarly, Nyarlathotep was a messenger of madness. Just like the fog, it's not just dangerous, but entirely impossible to understand. It behaves in a way that fog shouldn't behave, and this disconnect strikes us immediately, fracturing what we expect from the world as a whole. It not only erodes away the vision, but also the rationality. The rationality of the whole situation gets chipped away even further when we see how the fog seemingly chooses its victims. The ghosts who are in the fog don't lash out blindly. They target only the descendants of the original 6 conspirators, and this surgical precision of the strike makes it scarier. The fact that the fog acts as a carrier for all of the ghosts adds another Lovecraftian layer to the fog. It isn't an agency. In the Lovecraftian mythos, the eldritch beings don't attack out of hunger or hatred. They act because of their own logic or contacts. And the fog behaves exactly the same way. It arrived like a debt collector from another realm and reclaimed everything that was owed to it, not just emotionally, but also physically. This is why the fog doesn't feel like a regular ghost story. Instead, it feels like an apocalypse story. Antonio Bay isn't being haunted, it's being judged. The imagery of the fog sweeping the land is almost like the end-time scenario sealing the deal. The walls of reality are closing in, and the town is now going to be corrected for the moral equation that they messed up 100 years ago. This part right here taps into the deep Lovecraftian horror that we all know. The universe as we know it is supposed to be chaotic, but what if it's not? Instead, the universe is governed by rules we don't understand, and these rules are enforced by beings we don't actually see. And if you think about it like this, the fog then becomes a manifestation of that hidden structure. It's not angry, it's not vengeful, it's simply inevitable. The horror isn't born of emotion, but of function, and that makes it terrifying. The ghosts interact with the fog like they're made out of it. Blake and his crew are birthed by this fog, and that makes it entirely unsettling to watch it unfold on the screen. In Lovecraft's world, death isn't the end, it's the doorway. And sometimes, what comes out from that doorway isn't undead, but unmade. I believe that the fog not only brought Blake and his men back, but also stripped them to their basic core, turning them into more than the crew of the Elizabeth Dane. They could simply be vaguely human-shaped embodiments of death and hatred, and honestly, that would make so much sense. This blurring of lines between ghost horror and cosmic horror is what makes the fog unforgettable. The fog doesn't just say, oh yeah, the dead walk. Instead, it tells us that the dead walk under the forces of something that's beyond our control and comprehension. So, when the dead start walking, our fates are inevitable. Another divergence from traditional horror that made the fog so memorable for me has to be how the ghosts behave in this movie. Usually ghosts chatter, groan, moan, or even whisper exposition. They have some kind of personality and you can tell them apart, but not these ones. These ghosts don't have any personalities. They don't have any feelings, not even anger. They simply function as an extension of the fog. They operate in complete silence and have the precision that very few horror villain groups can boast of. These ghosts don't feel like individuals who are seeking revenge. Instead, they feel like one force, one presence, They are the expressions of one singular will. This lack of personhood is important. In traditional ghost stories, the ghosts are the victims who need their personal stories to be resolved so that they can move on. However, in the fog, there's no such thing. There's no resolution. The only thing that the fog wants is balance. It doesn't want understanding or dialogue. The fog arrives, does what it came to do, and leaves. This is the judgment in its most terrifying form. Inhumane, inevitable, and impersonal. The cinematic peak of this movie is when Father Malone offers the Golden Cross, which was crafted from stolen fortune, to the ghosts. This isn't a bribe, it's a gesture, a symbolic offering or acknowledgement and repentance. But it doesn't appease the fog. Malone is taken by the fog because, for the fog, this debt was never personal. It was existential. The entire town bears the weight of its origin, and this Lovecraftian influence of crimes echoing forever looms over the place. The fog isn't an obstacle, it's the story's central antagonist, a glowing force of nature that brought the past into the present. So, when we say the fog is Lovecraftian, we mean that it shares the most disturbing aspects of the Lovecraftian mythos. The implication is that there are forces greater than us, older than us, who don't care about us, who we are, or if we're sorry. Carpenter taps into this beautifully in the movie. Themes of isolation, inevitability, and cosmic justice. Honestly, Lovecraftian horror and existential dread are synonymous in my head. Lovecraft never gave us slasher thrillers or jump scares. Instead, the stories he gave us thrived on the simple idea that humanity is powerless in the face of uncaring ancient forces that we don't understand and who we cannot persuade by praying. And John Carpenter managed to embody those themes beautifully in this movie. The characters have traditional powers, no flashlights or radios, there's nothing they can arm themselves with when the fog comes. Technology is the first thing to fail when the fog enters frame. This disbalances the characters, and everything that may have given them control goes away. The radio station's broadcasts almost fail. The phone lines go dead. In the most telling sequence, a weatherman tracks the path the fog took, and you can see that it doesn't move the way natural laws dictate. All of this together brings forth a helplessness on the screen, which is the film's main core. The horror of the fog lies in what it promises. The audience learns about the town's dark secret, and immediately, the story locks itself. The film's trajectory is immediately set in stone, and the retribution for these people who were killed is a guarantee. The fog comes with a purpose, and it collects. This sense of destiny also adds to the eeriness of the story. The people in the town go about their day preparing for the celebration, only to learn out of nowhere that they're living on borrowed time. When the killings start and when the fog shows up at the coastline, the question isn't how to stop the fog and save their lives. The question is, do they deserve it? The guilt of the sin they didn't commit was all over Antonio Bay, and the ghosts came to collect that debt. Blake and his crew, surprisingly, despite being ghosts, aren't evil in the traditional sense. They aren't serial killers, they're cold and calculating. They're acting a certain way because they have a plan. They have targets, and they don't plan on hurting anyone who isn't those targets. They're not here for sadism, they're here for correction. They are the instruments of cosmic justice, which is older than civilization itself, and there's no forgiveness or redemption to this justice. The justice will be served even if you give them the sacrifice or the sincere gesture asking for forgiveness. In the chilling final moments, the fog showcases that it's genuinely all about inevitability. The wrong was too great, too ancient to be forgotten. This bleak outcome is another Lovecraftian trope that the movie shares. In The Call of Cthulhu, the protagonist learns about the cosmic god awakening under the sea and realizes, much to his horror, that nothing, no science or faith, can stop that god. Similarly, in The Dunwich Horror, the townspeople manage to banish the supernatural threat, but that banishment is temporary and done with the help of rituals they had forgotten and knowledge that is alien to them. In both cases, humanity doesn't survive by overcoming the evil, humanity survives by sidestepping the colossal foot that was about to crush it. The fog works the same way. You cannot defeat the fog, you can simply pray that it ignores you. The despair of a terrifying force of nature that isn't governed by the rules we know is gripping. The fog's world doesn't fit into a traditional religious framework. There's no heaven to appeal to or any hell to escape to. The divine justice, in theory, could have given some leeway to appeal for mercy, but this justice, it's cosmic. It simply cares about restoring the balance lost, nothing else. The narrative of the film also has an undue advantage with the film's sense of isolation. All characters are either alone emotionally or quite literally physically. Like, take Stevie for example. She broadcasts from a lonely lighthouse, and when the fog rolls in, she's not only helpless to save her son, but she is also helpless to protect herself. Father Malone, who's the moral center of the town, also doesn't have any congregation to guide. He learns of the truth by himself, and this physical and spiritual cutoff from society for each character makes these characters mirror the solitude that every iconic Lovecraftian protagonist felt. Whether it's the protagonist of The Call of Cthulhu or The Shadow over Innsmouth, isolation of the main character is inevitable, and a death sentence. And The Fog honors that trope perfectly. The characters are staring into the abyss, facing oblivion, and they have no one beside them. Ultimately, this film understands the core strings of cosmic horror and delivers them through the understanding of the characters. These characters are alone, powerless, and already judged, even if they don't know it. Carpenter leans heavily into the Lovecraftian ideas, and the fog is the myth that haunts them. The town isn't in danger, it's also guilty of sin, and the dead are correct. So, there's no prayer strong enough for mercy. There are no weapons sharp enough to slice the dead. There's no light bright enough to guide the characters. There is only the fog, and the sinking sense of guilt about the sins they never committed. Marvelous verdict! You may look at the Fog's cover and think of it as a typical ghost story, and no one would blame you for thinking that. But underneath it all, this is an older, colder, and more Lovecraftian horror that everyone deserves to taste. This story has undead sailors and dead townspeople, but the sailors aren't vengeful and seeking blood for the sake of sadism. They're right. And the townsfolk, they're simply collateral on the restoration of a cosmic balance. This movie doesn't care about apologies and sincere gestures. It looks the audience dead in the eye as the dread of powers greater than us slowly starts sinking in. The dread of inevitability, mixed with guilt, feels like a boot on your neck as you find your eyes glued to the screen. By being shapeless and unstoppable, the fog is like a metaphor for this kind of horror. And the best part? The fog isn't evil. It's simply fog that exists, and in front of it all, the humans are tiny ants beneath a boot. Carpenter was the best director the Fog could have gotten. He does everything right so that the mystery is continued, and we feel trapped in the movie, just like the characters are in Antonio Bay, fearing the fog. It has been around 20 years since I first saw this movie, and to this day, I'm a little scared when I'm traveling in the mountains and see the fog start to roll in. John Carpenter taps into something that's completely primal and philosophical, which leaves a mark on you. The movie leaves you wondering if all the bad things that happened were always meant to happen because it was inevitable and not just an awful coincidence. Some ghosts don't want closure, they want balance, and that is what The Fog is all about. Let us know what you guys think about The Fog in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and if you're smart, stay out of the fog.